Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the After the Frame podcast. My name is Malik, and I am joined, as always, by.
Hi, I'm Matt.
Today, we are going to be tackling Christopher Nolan's newest epic, The Odyssey, that came out last week or this past weekend. We are going to be tackling Evil Dead Burn, and we're going to be tackling The Invite. So, Matt, which movie do you want to tackle first?
Why don't we talk about the invite?
Sure, sure. What were your thoughts going into the movie? Um, did you see Olivia Wilde's previous stuff she's directed? Are you a fan of her work? Are you a fan of the cast that's in the movie?
Yeah, I honestly didn't know too much about this one until the marketing ramped up. I have seen Don't Worry, what was it? Don't Worry, Darling, right?
Don't worry, darling. Yeah.
Yeah. That was just okay to me. I remember like as that was in the lead up to rolling out to theaters, like it was being heavily marketed. And then like I saw it in theaters and it just kind of fell a little flat for me. I didn't think it was anything too crazy. Um, but looking at, Olivia Wilde directing as well as the cast in this one, I was excited. I'm like, I'll go check it out. And I was very pleasantly surprised with the outcome.
Yeah, as was I. I have seen her other two movies that she's done. So I've seen Don't Worry, Darling, and also Booksmart, I believe, is the other one that she did. And yeah, I think like this third one is easily the best of the three. And I really wanted to give her flowers for not just her directing, but her acting. And this was really good. I mean, it's a very small cast. All four of the actors, Penelope Cruz, Seth Rogen, Ed Norton, all of them are bringing their A game. So yeah, I mean, we can get into it. We can start off with the stuff that worked for us. I think that both of us are going to have more work than didn't.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I don't know about you, but I have quite a bit.
Okay, our stuff is probably going to overlap, so you can go ahead and then I'll kind of add on.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big thing for me is to this point in the year, I think The Invite has one of the year's best scripts. And I think the writing is honestly the movie's biggest star because the dialogue really felt like an organic conversation between real people while quietly setting up, enormous jokes, the arguments that you see, and these really emotional reveals. And I think that's difficult writing to pull off because it has to feel casual while also being extremely precise. And with that, the outrageous concept that you get in this movie honestly does really feel believable. And, you look at it on paper, like the premise could very easily become broad, artificial, or just purely gimmicky. But I think the script did a really good job grounding it in, recognizable relationship dynamics, which ultimately allowed, just this insane situation to feel really strangely feasible. And I think that balance is a huge reason that the comedy worked. Um, and as you said, this movie features four really excellent performances. Like the entire quartet really operated at a high level. There, nobody really feels like the weak link, and each member of the cast really brought a different type of energy to the apartment. And I think their chemistry really allowed the movie to survive, almost entirely through conversation, reactions, and shifting alliances. Like the whole movie is pretty much set in this one apartment complex. Um, Edward Norton and his comedic performance was my favorite. I genuinely think he will be a legitimate awards level standout when it comes time. But he switches from this dramatic intensity to comedy with really just tremendous control over his acting, and he never appears to strain himself for the laugh. And the performance seemed funny to me because just of how completely, he understood the character in my eyes. Like it was very seamless. Um, Seth Rogen, I thought had like a very, relatable and throwback energy. I thought his performance was a little bit more retro feeling, kind of what really made him effective, like back when as an effective comedy lead. And he did a good job tapping into that. Um, he really brought looseness and humor without really reducing his character to just a collection of jokes and laughing, but he really sounds hysterical while still fitting into the film's adult relationship drama. Uh, Olivia Wilde for both her acting and direction, she really succeeds on both sides of the camera. As a performer, like she really holds her own inside such a stacked ensemble, and as a director, like she did a really good job organizing the rhythms of the conversation, the visual language that you see, and the really just escalating discomfort without really letting the movie feel static. And I kind of already touched on like the single apartment setting. They did a really good job making sure that didn't feel stale. Because keeping nearly the entire story in one location, I think it could have made the movie feel like a filmed stage play, and thankfully it didn't. I really think the direction and setting and the way they made the setting work really kept the room really just active and immersive. You honestly, like as the audience, like you really kind of feel like another person sitting in the apartment, just watching the evening slowly spiral into the insanities. But the camera really trusts the actors. Like I think Olivia Wilde's direction, really just allowed shots to continue after characters finish speaking. You see these facial expressions, pauses, body language like that often reveals more than the dialogue itself does. And I think that patience that was behind the camera really kind of gave these performances more room and really made the confrontations feel authentic. Um, I guess closing positives here, like I think the movie did a really strong job with the adult themes with a real substance behind it. And the movie really has stuff to say about, long-term relationships, aging, desire, resentment, the way that couples communicate. And they did a good job making those themes feel relatable rather than presenting it to you like a lecture. It's a very modern movie, but with the confidence of, like a great like 1970s adult relationship drama. And honestly, it really had a satisfying ending because movies built around, volatile conversation, I think can struggle to find a clean conclusion. But this one, found an ending that felt earned and satisfying rather than simply stopping when the evening ended.
Okay. Yeah, I'm going to highlight, like you said, the writing in this movie was definitely the standout. The screenplay is definitely going to be mentioned, I think, during award season. One of my favorite scenes from any movie this year is honestly just that scene when Seth Rogen comes home and Olivia Wilde is like, kind of preparing the apartment for this dinner that Seth Rogen doesn't know about. It's just it felt very like raw and felt like very natural, and the chemistry between the two, it just didn't feel like that scene had many cuts, if any. It kind of just seemed like they kind of let loose. He just kind of came in, they were just bouncing off of each other type of thing, and it felt like you said, like you'd be in the room seeing a married couple arguing about something. So yeah, the chemistry not just between them two, but all four of them were really good. I actually really enjoyed the score in this movie. I thought that like it was unique and it reflected all of the emotions that whatever character on screen was feeling. Um, for the whole cast, I really enjoyed how Edward Norton and Penelope Cruz were kind of like this perfect foil, for lack of a better word, for the situation that Seth Rogen and Olivia Wilde's characters in their marriage are going through. I feel like them coming to the dinner and them interacting in the way that they did, not to give away too much of the plot. Um, I feel like that kind of provoked the conversation and started to create situations where both of them could see the other person's side and they were not really engaging in those conversations. So it was like the perfect thing that they needed, but they didn't know they needed. So I like that. The editing in the movie was really sharp. I really like the intimate setting, like you already mentioned, that it's just, I mean, other than the opening scene of you showing so where Seth Rogen works at, from when he leaves that, it's just the whole movie's in the apartment. And yeah, I liked how intimate it was with just the four of them. And you mentioned it kind of, felt like a play. I kind of like that it felt like that at times. It didn't like detract from anything in the movie. It like, if anything, it heightened it for me. Um, but yeah, not to repeat too much of the stuff that you already said, but I agree with the majority of the positives that you gave. Um, I'll touch quickly on the things like nitpicks. Um, Within the plot of the movie, the layout of the apartment kinda didn't make too much sense for me because Seth Rogen's character, his whole thing is that these people are doing something very noisily right above them, but then there's another scene as you go throughout the movie that you see that a window that's in the apartment is playing kind of like an important plot point. But the way that the apartment is structured for where we're into to where that window is seeing up to the next apartment didn't make sense for how they were hearing everything, unless
Mhm.
like Edward Norton and Penelope Cruz's apartment is just like gigantic or something. So that was like a nitpick or something that I would just like kind of notice. The second thing is that I felt like towards the end where you did mention it is a satisfying ending, and I agree. The resolution that we kind of reach to is more in vein of exploring, I felt, Joe, who is, Seth Rogen's character, and you kinda get a sense he kinda goes off and talks about, his backstory and his life and all of these things, and I wish that we kinda got that more with, Olivia, Wilde's character because I felt like she brought this performance that seemed like she was so frustrated in her marriage and she felt so unseen and unheard. But you don't get much of any backstory other than like that little conversation that they have there at the end. So I'd love to have them explore that. I was fine that they didn't do too much backstory on Penelope Cruz and Edward Norton. I kind of like that they kind of just showed up at the apartment, did what they needed to do, and then they left, and it was all just for that purpose. So, but those are the only two little nitpicks I had. How about you?
Yeah, I honestly, I don't even really have nitpicks. I just kind of have like things that caught me off guard that I think could serve as like, good quote unquote warnings to people who haven't seen this movie. Um, the first act is filled with a good chunk of fighting, and it for some people it may be too aggressive. Like I think the opening conflicts in the early beginning could feel slightly overplayed depending on who's watching it and what they think and what kind of they're into. um but for a movie like this, like I think the characters need to be established quickly, but I do think the early arguing may kind of push them toward caricature before the movie really kind of settles into its rhythm. um I do think the premise of the movie could repel some viewers, and I think the central invitation behind it is very deliberately provocative. I mean, some audiences and viewers that you may feel uncomfortable with the concept before the movie even gets the opportunity to really reveal its emotional depth behind it. Um, it is very heavily dependent on dialogue and performance. It's not a visually expansive or plot driven movie. So if you're a viewer and you don't often connect with the conversation, the characters, or the social discomfort, like you may find this contained approach of this film limiting. And the cringe that it goes on in this movie, like, I like some of that stuff. But depending on how you feel about it, like it can become intense. Being trapped in this apartment with these couples really means there is very little escape from the tension that you see. And for me, like that pressure is part of what made the movie effective. But for some people, depending on how into that stuff you are, it may also make it an uncomfortable watch. So again, not really like nitpicky things, but just things, if for those of you listening or watching who have not seen it and, just kind of get educated on what it's about. Those are things to consider in the back of mind.
Yeah, I also wanted to mention I really like that the movie to me did not feel like it was excluding anyone. I feel like whether you're married, in a long-term relationship, single, what have you, I think that there's something in the movie for like most people can kind of attach some semblance of themselves to the characters. I felt like, in my theater, the way Seth Rogen was reacting to all of the nonsense that was going on in his home was I felt like, the audience was, like, laughing along with it because, like, yeah, a lot of the times I was thinking in my head, I was like, "Yeah, I would probably say the same thing, like, that he's saying." So, yeah, I feel like everybody can kinda find something in this movie, so don't just think that, "Oh, like, it's another married couple thing, like, if I'm not married, I'm not gonna really find any use in the movie." I think it's accessible for everyone. So,
Yeah, totally agree.
alright, what did you give The Invite?
So I gave the invite a 9.3 out of 10.
Very nice. I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. Originally, I gave it a 4 out of 5, and then I slept on it, and the next day I really couldn't find reason as to why it's not a 9 out of 10. So, yeah, it immediately jumped into my top 3 of the year. Very big surprise. So yeah.
Yeah, mine was my number one for the longest time, like, was sitting pretty, and then this came out, and then this jumped to that number one spot. Spoiler alert, it did not last very long.
Yeah, for another movie that I suspect we'll be talking about a little
I
later.
wonder what that is.
Yeah, Evil Dead Burn. Um yeah, so you have anything else you wanted to talk about for The Invite?
No, I'm all good. Just highly recommend it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, that was, an A24, and they are really, you know, doing really well as a studio right now. They're picking up all of the right screenplays, they're, like, backing all the right, um, creative minds, so, yeah, I'm happy for them. Let's do Evil Dead Burn next, and then we can finish off with the Odyssey as the main event. Um, how do you feel about the Evil Dead franchise as a whole? I mean, the franchise has now become so different than the Sam Raimi Evil Dead movies with Ash. I don't know if I assume maybe you've seen them, but
Mhm.
maybe you haven't. But yeah, it's completely different now. But all of these are confirmed to still take place in that same universe. So what are your thoughts on the franchise?
So I'm a big fan of the franchise, but honestly, I prefer what it was than what it is now. Um, because like Evil Dead 2 and Army of Darkness are all really good movies. Honestly, Evil Dead 2 is probably the best one. Um, and then I was not a big fan of the one that came out um probably like 10 years or so ago.
The first one of the new trilogy. I
Yeah,
think it's
just
also just called Evil Dead.
yeah, that one I was not a big fan of. Evil Dead Rise I actually thought was pretty good. Comparing that to just Evil Dead. Um and then this one came out and I'm like, okay, it's cool. We're still continuing this trend of, it's all set in the same universe, but it's completely tonally different from the originals. Um, I did not care for this one. I'll say that much.
Okay. It didn't bother me as much. I definitely like Evil Dead Rise more. Um, we'll get into it, but this movie definitely had like a quote unquote mission statement. I felt like it was
Uh-huh.
trying to, it definitely had like an idea that it was like going to be doing something and it did it, but it like, it doesn't, that doesn't make a great movie necessarily. Um, so yeah, but we can get into it. I do like that Sam Raimi is still producing these movies.
Mhm.
You know, it's nice that he's still like kind of in the mix a little bit. So, and the next movie after this is allegedly supposed to be chronologically the first ever movie. It's going to go back before the first Evil original, like before Ash and them going to that cabin and everything. It's meant to be like way back when. So, should be interesting. But all right, we can get into it with we can start off with what worked. Um, for me, I think that the way that the film looks is its best quality, bar from the CGI burnt husband dead-eyed at the end. But other than that, I feel like the film tries to create a unique stamp on the franchise. It definitely went for more of the gruesome gore type of thing. The makeup was really good for all of the different violent acts that were going on in the movie. So I'll give it credit for that, but that's like what I was saying is like their mission statement. I think that they were kind of going for being the most violent um chapter in the Evil Dead franchise, being the most gruesome. And you know, depending on who you ask, they might have done that, but it just kind of lent into more trying to do that more than focusing on the plot. It was just a lot of, you know, gore for gore's sake, I felt. Um yeah, that's my biggest positive, I'd say. I really like the callbacks to the previous film. Not to like spoil too much, but the previous film, Evil Dead Rise, begins with that cold open at the lake, and the last movie also kind of had like a whole circle moment where at the end of the apartment you see the girl who gets possessed by the Deadites at the end, and then she ends up going to the lake, and then this movie begins with the same girl from the lake, and then where she goes to kind of kicks everything off. So I appreciated that, and then in the post credit scene, there is also a callback to the Evil Dead Rise as well. So I appreciated those callbacks as well. Um, Other than that, I feel those are my only two real positives. Everything else was either more I was kind of apathetic towards, or I had an issue with. So, what worked for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think my biggest point, and you basically restated it, was this one. It is very competently made, and as you will hear in my negatives, I think even with my harsher reaction, like I will acknowledge that this is not an incompetent horror movie because the direction, the effects, the performances, and really the technical construction of it all, like it does demonstrate the real craft that went into this movie. I think there's been some disagreement online, and I think it's less about whether it's well made and more about what that craft is really being used to accomplish. But this movie honestly has an interesting dramatic premise because it centers around a woman really being trapped with her deceased abuser's parents. And I think that that created a really strong emotional setup. And that concept helps bring grief, trauma, resentment, and really just complicated family dynamics into the overall Evil Dead framework. And I think there is the foundation for a more psychologically layered entry in this franchise. Um, the movie as a whole, like I think is a solid standalone horror experience. Like I think removing it from expectations surrounding the larger franchise, like I do think this is a reasonably effective horror movie because the setup is tense, the danger is immediate, and the film really delivers the genre mechanics that audience members should expect. This movie does really use inventive gore and scares, and like some of the violent imagery is genuinely creative and shocking. Between the practical and visual horror, it occasionally finds memorable ways to escalate the chaos that you get from the Deadite. And I think viewers primarily seeking extreme gore, like you may get exactly what you want. And with that is a nasty, committed tone. Like the film does not pull punches. It really commits fully to cruelty, discomfort, and physical horror. And I think for the right audience, that relentlessness may be more of a selling point rather than a problem.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. Um, my negatives are a lot more long-winded, I'd say, so I'm gonna try and keep them uh, somewhat concise. I do want to acknowledge. I agree that I feel like the film did do a good job of kind of jumping straight into the action pretty quickly. Didn't like linger too long. But you mentioned something very interesting, which for me was actually one of the negatives is the theming issue. I feel like the movie was trying to balance too many themes, and the different characters kind of had their own stuff going on. I believe Alice is the main character's name, and she's the one that, as you said, like, she has this abusive husband, and she's, that dies, and then she's kind of with this terrible family who like clearly does not like her, or has a problem with her. And I felt like the family as a whole was kind of going through their own family trauma situation, and then she's trying to, obviously it's bringing up themes of domestic abuse, and then um her brother-in-law, who's also there, but they're all like friends, like they're much kinder to her. He's going through a whole thing where it was kind of being brave, and he's kind of like a wuss, and like he just kind of stands around while like things happen. So I feel like all the characters kind of had different themes they were focusing on rather than the movie having one. I would have preferred them just kind of focusing on the domestic abuse thing, and kind of it would have made things a little bit like better for me if they just focused on that. Um, but it wasn't terribly, it wasn't too distracting or anything like that. My biggest issue I had with the movie was the inconsistency with the Deadites' powers. Some Deadites, when you chop off their head, they are, completely incapacitated. Then another one gets shot in the head 3 times and can still use its powers. Their whole thing coming after the Kandarian dagger, and somehow the dagger can call out to them, but only up to a point where they can find the family who has the dagger, but they can't be like the dagger isn't calling out to them to just go to where the dagger actually is. I didn't care for all of that. I felt like that was kind of unnecessarily like put within the plot. The characters, as in all horror movies, do some very stupid choices. The dad, who is at that point possessed, kind of attacks the family dog, and their first instinct is to put him in a car, getting locked up in a car with this person who's clearly unhinged. They don't know what's going on. And then, yeah, obviously bad shit happens when they're in the car. So things like that. And then the scene at the end really bothered me with her taking all of the daggers on the ground and like going through all of them and just stabbing the deadite, and the deadite's just sitting there. So little stupid stuff like that I didn't enjoy. And the last thing I'll say is, as I mentioned already, the CGI for the husband when he comes back as kind of like that final ghost she has to conquer from her the trauma she had within the marriage and the family. I thought that all the deadites throughout the movie were very intimidating. And then when he came in, I was kind of like taken out of it. I was like, he kind of, yeah, not the CGI didn't really work for me. Um, and like you already mentioned, like if you're a fan of gore and that type of horror, if that's like more your thing, like Saw, House of Wax, like these like very, like gore, bloody type of things, um, then this movie is going to be for you. For me, I'm more of a jump scare type of person, the paranormal type of thing. And the movie has the paranormal, but not enough jump scares. I felt that the setting in this movie just didn't make me feel as like constricted with fear like the last movie, with it just being like in an apartment and like they couldn't leave. This one felt like a little bit more like open. So yeah, I think the horror in this is not going to be for everyone. But yeah, those are all my negatives. How about you?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think a lot of mine will feed into yours because I think my biggest takeaway with this one is honestly like I don't think this one fully captured the spirit of Evil Dead because the movie may function as horror, but just because it has that does not necessarily feel like the best expression of this, franchise in particular. Because, if anybody's seen the full series, like it traditionally has this specific combination of invention, personality, physical comedy, demonic chaos, and just this playful cruelty. I mean, freaking Ash has a chainsaw for an arm. Like, but this one is significantly heavier on nastiness than its charm. And like that's a trend that you'll see across this newer trilogy. But again, like I think this one in particular, like it didn't do it any favors. Um, I think the dramatic premise of it is really underused because I mentioned in the positives like the idea of what the premise was and the relationship between the protagonist and her deceased abuser's family like really is a fascinating setup. But unfortunately, like I don't think the movie pushed that idea as far as it could. Like I think the emotional and thematic possibilities were there, but they really became secondary to the gore. And with the gore, it's honestly just gore for gore's sake. Like I think that's my strongest criticism. And the violence really seemed to exist only to provoke a reaction. Gore can deepen a story, really reveal character, or provide a darkly comic payoff. But here, I think too much of it felt and appeared disconnected from any larger narrative purpose. And with that, the tone I thought felt cruel rather than fun. And other gore heavy franchises, like you mentioned, like Saw, like they can make these elaborate death scenes, playful, suspenseful, or just absurd. But Evil Dead Burn, I think, just feels meaner and less enjoyable. And like the violence becomes something to endure rather than something that creates twisted entertainment. And you already kind of touched on this one. I think the dog sequence that ultimately just crossed a line for me because I think shock alone does not automatically create effective horror. And killing an animal may provoke the audience, but if it adds little beyond cruelty, like it can feel manipulative rather than meaningful. And this sequence in particular was a moment for me where I think the movie mistaked upsetting the viewer for successfully scaring them. And ultimately, like main disappointments with this one, like there was not enough creativity or personality because we mentioned when we opened this, like a Sam Raimi produced or associated franchise like should really feel inventive, surprising, and slightly unhinged. But this movie delivers violence, but not always the strange visual wit or creative charm associated with the best entries. Like Sam Raimi directed Send Help, which came out earlier this year, and that movie, had violence, but it also was inventive and it had creativity behind it. It had some charm, it had some innovative ways of doing about things. But Evil Dead Burn really just felt like a generic nasty horror film wearing an Evil Dead label. There's really limited emotional connection because when the characters and the dramatic premise are not developed fully, like I think the gore loses impact and the audience is really left reacting to the violence itself rather than fearing what it means for people they care about. And in this instance, you couldn't really connect to any of the characters. So with that, it's very audience dependent. And the I think the main point has been, if you're a fan of extreme mean spirited gore, like you may find this effective. But viewers like myself who dislike torture oriented horror or need violence to serve a stronger narrative purpose may just have a miserable time.
Oh yeah, I can agree with that. I've warned many people that are gonna go and see it, or probably have seen it by now. When they asked me about it, I said and I said in my individual review, there's a dog scene in this that I don't think people are gonna take too kindly to. Um, I believe it was actually seen in the trailers as well, but I agree that yeah, it's just there for shock value, and I guess just so we can have a deadite dog, but that doesn't really add anything to the plot, really. Um, this movie was allegedly supposed to be an NC-17, which I believe the first when I think I was on HBO Max and I saw the first Evil Dead has an NC-17 rating. on HBO. Um, but yeah, this movie's pretty violent. I know that they took scenes out so they could keep the R rating. I don't really know what else they had cooking up that was gonna warrant
Burning.
NC-17. Yeah, I mean, so I have no idea. Last thing I wanted to say is that stick around after the credits. People in my movie theater
Just
left,
got up
and
and
I
got
was
out.
just like the only one in there still watching. But yeah, there's a mid and post credit scene. The post credit scene makes basically zero sense to me within the context of how I understand Deadites to be, but you know, it's there.
Yeah.
Any other thoughts on Evil Dead Burn?
No, I'm all good.
Alrighty, what did you give it?
I gave it a 4.4 out of 10.
Okay. Yeah, you're a lot lower on it than I am. I was entertained enough, and then just the sheer look of the movie, I gave it credit for. So I gave it 3 out of 5 stars. It's definitely not one that I'll be rewatching. Like I go back every so often and watch Evil Dead Rise or the original trilogy, but I don't see myself really going back and revisiting this one. So, but, like you said, that horrors depends on what you like. It's going to be an audience based thing. So, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's one that I had moderate expectations for, and it just didn't get there, and yeah, it was just a little more gruesome than I would have liked. That's just me.
yeah. Yeah, I can agree with that. Alrighty, let's move on to the Odyssey, which we both watched together in IMAX. Unfortunately, not 70 millimeter, but IMAX nonetheless. And that was really something. What I mean, obviously you're a fan of Christopher Nolan, but where do you think that this movie, after seeing it and taking some time to really think about it, where do you think that this ranks amongst his films overall, or even his more recent films? So, like, what were your thoughts on it?
So, it's funny. It's funny you asked me that because I was just having a conversation with somebody else about this yesterday, and we were just kind of mapping out like hypothetical, like where would this sit? Like, what did we think? Um, I'm still trying to figure out exactly where it sits. I have an idea, but I need to rewatch the other movie that I gave a tied score, and then I'll figure out, which one is better than the other. Um, but it's definitely top 5. I will say that much because uh so Oppenheimer, I'll get this out of the way, is my favorite Nolan movie, and it's one of very few movies I would give a perfect score. 10 out of 10, no notes, would change absolutely nothing. Uh but I remember when Oppenheimer was announced, and I was not super like excited about Nolan going into the more like historical realm.
Mm,
And I was kind of the same way with Dunkirk too. Like I always enjoyed more of his like, trippy, mind-bending films like The Prestige or Inception or Memento. Like Memento, I think was one of the first couple ones that I had seen. Uh and just, the mind bending and, connectiveness within the film. Like I liked more of that. But then, when Oppenheimer came out and was more of a historical biopic, but also sci-fi, film, very excellently done. Like, no notes. And then Nolan announced like, hey, I'm doing the Odyssey. I remember I had my doubts. I'm like, this story has been told a bunch of times. Uh all of those doubts were immediately silenced like 10 minutes into the movie.
oh yeah, once you saw Travis Scott, I know.
Hey,
Yeah,
it's lit.
he's the first voice you hear in the movie, if you can believe
He
it.
really is. Yeah.
So
He's the
yeah, just
first and the last because
he's the bard.
he's the bard, and
Mhm.
if you've seen the movie and you've, seen it start to finish, you're walking out to the credits like they play a Travis Scott song that he made for the soundtrack.
It's
Yeah,
true.
first and last that you hear. It's lit.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't even know where to begin with this movie. I guess we can just dive right into it. I think that a lot of the controversy of this movie with it, oh, they didn't cast Greek actors, or Helen of Troy is portrayed by Lupita Nyong'o, who's a black actress. Like,
Why
it's
does it
all
matter? Like, it's a
it's
good,
all
it's,
rubbish.
yeah.
Yeah, once you see the movie, if you're bothered by that type I mean, there are things that slightly bothered me in the movie dialogue wise that I know some people were also not happy with. Um, but it didn't bother me to the point where, how I've been seeing people ranting and raving online. Um, some of the casting was a little I felt as though Christopher Nolan just kind of has this thing going on now where it's like he just has an ensemble cast and it's just like, well, household names are just going to be kind of, because I didn't feel like John Bernthal. It's not like he was terrible or anything. I felt like he just kind of didn't fit that role necessarily. And then some of the other people are literally in it for like a scene or two. Like they don't, like Lupita Nyong'o, I don't even think has like 5 minutes of screen time. So
Mhm.
all the people that are bitching and complaining about her being, a Helen of Troy don't have to
And
really worry.
well, she plays two roles, and with that,
That's
it's
true.
not even 5 minutes. Like, just think about this. Like, whoa, okay.
Yeah, I mean, the movie, obviously, if you've read the book, it's centered around Odysseus, Penelope, um, the people in Ithaca, like his journey, like the whole Odyssey, like the movie's called. Like it's a lot of Matt Damon, it's a lot of Robert Pattinson, Tom Holland is in it a good amount. I think that, like, depending on how important the character is to the plot, obviously they're in it that,
Hmm.
it just depends. So yeah, none of that casting stuff bothered me, but we can get into it. To I guess let's actually start off with the if you have anything that like bothered you about the movie, because I feel like it'll be a very short section for the both of us. We can do that, and then we can go off onto a whole rant and rave about the positives.
Yeah, I ultimately I could, after sitting on it and thinking about it and doing some research, I have identified virtually no major flaw. And with where my score is at on this movie, uh, I think this movie is not a case where there is an obvious, broken subplot, a weak performance, or structural failure to really dissect. I think any criticism that I could have turned up would be minor compared to the size of the accomplishment with this movie. And the only things that I will say is I think that the scale of this movie may be overwhelming for some viewers, because if you don't know that this movie was filmed in 100% IMAX, most of Nolan's other movies have kind of sat around the 50% mark. I think Dunkirk was in like the 70% range. He's always kind of used it for like the broader scenes and everything, not every single scene or dialogue. And I really have to, you know, I love how we're talking about negatives and I start veering towards positives. Um, I think Nolan really clearly designed this as an enormous, intense theatrical experience. So if you're a viewer who prefers something quieter or more intimate, you may admire the craft of this more than you'll emotionally connect with every single section. But that's my forecast on other people's personal preferences rather than a clear failure by the movie. Um, and I think the hype that this movie generated really creates an almost impossible standard. And when a movie arrives really positioned as the cinematic event of the year, I'm looking at you, Doomsday. You're not that. You're not that guy, pal. I think people may spend part of the runtime really judging whether it meets the expectations. The remarkable thing for me is that this one does, but the hype behind it, not only by myself, but broader audiences and everyone, will, I think, inevitably shape your experience as a whole, whether you're a Nolan fan or not, whether you're a fan of Matt Damon, whether you're seeing it purely because of Tom Holland and Spider-Man. Ooh, uh, it's a fantastic event. So I don't really have any negatives.
Okay. Um, I don't have negatives per se. My stuff is nitpicky again. One of my things that I'm gonna say, I've already like talked to people about it that I know my girlfriend's supposed to be seeing it tonight, and she unfortunately is seeing a 10 o'clock showing, and I said, "Oof," because the thing I've been warning everybody about is that it is a almost 3 hour movie. Um, Out of other 3 hour movies I've seen, it's not as bad as some other ones, but I definitely did feel it a couple times, especially in the middle. So that's just something I wanted to mention in case, with people like planning on seeing it. But my big, if you want to call it a negative, was yeah, the dialogue to me felt like very modern at times, and it flip flopped between certain characters kind of having the dialogue what you would expect in a Greek epic, like old-timey type, almost Shakespearean dialogue, and then you have Tom Holland going, "Hey, dad. Hey, dad. What's going on, dad?" And I'm like so, like, little things like that, I mean, it's just, like, a small example that, like, ki it didn't take you out of the movie to a point where it was so distracting. It happens. I mean, as I said, it's a 3 hour movie. So if that happens like a couple times, like it's so minuscule. But it was something that I did like notice. It happened enough that I noticed it. Um, but that's all I have. Like everything else in the movie, like you said, there's really no weak performances. We'll get into it now with our positives, but yeah, everything else I didn't have an issue with. So all right,
Yeah, I
let's
mean, the use case of mom and dad versus mother and father is like a small thing. But it with the repetitiveness, like it's pretty much anytime Tom Holland is screen, like mom, dad, mom this, dad that. It's just like it's like that's not what you're saying. I kept waiting. So you mentioned John Bernthal's character. I kept waiting for him to say, "Let me tell you something," or like something in that regard. Because in every movie, show, whatever he does, like in some way, shape, or form, like he always says, like let me tell you, like he's like doing the dad finger. He's like, hey, let me tell you something.
I
I
think
was
he
waiting for it.
did.
Did he?
I think he did in the scene where Tom Holland meets him for dinner. I don't remember exactly what words he used, but when Tom Holland is asking him about his dad, and he says something along the lines of like, "Oh, let me tell you something about Odysseus. He wants to learn about Odysseus."
That meme
Like,
is so funny. Like anytime I see like John Bernthal, it's like it's like Punisher chained up in Daredevil. He's like, yeah, let me tell you something, Red. It's like, whoa,
yeah. So I felt like out of all the casting, he was the one that I felt like was kind of just more himself.
there, yeah.
Um, it didn't bother me enough because he's barely in the movie as well. So like if he was more a prominent character, I feel like I'd have it more of a negative. But John Bernthal is going to be John Bernthal. What are you going to do? They cast him for a reason. As Anne Hathaway said, is that if you're in a Christopher Nolan film, you're top three in the industry in what you do. So everybody is there in that movie for a reason.
He's
As I get it,
top three, and telling people something.
yeah, exactly. And as I'll get into with my positives, I feel like literally everybody that like was involved in this movie was kind of trying their best to be at an A plus level. Like everybody kind of came in swinging. So, but we can get in. Let's get into the positives now, and we can go down. You know, the cast. We can go down the grand scale of everything, the practical effect. Like we could go on and on. So where would you like to begin?
I have a lot, so buckle up. Um, I think for me, ultimate takeaway is that this movie is a true big screen accomplishment. Like this movie is like filmmaking at the absolute highest level. And with that, every department really worked together toward the same goal, like creating something massive, immersive, and really just worthy of this story's impossible scale. And it is not just a good adaptation or a good blockbuster. Like it genuinely feels like a cinematic event. Um, and I mentioned, kind of the impossible hype of this movie. Christopher Nolan delivers. Like, expectations for this movie were almost unfairly high, and somehow it still lives up to them because Nolan really takes one of the foundational stories in Western literature and turns it into something urgent, visceral, and built specifically for the theatrical experience. And I think very few filmmakers could have mounted something this ambitious without losing control of it. Um, Matt Damon is perfectly cast. He's completely at home as Odysseus. He really has the intelligence, the wariness, the physical presence, and movie star credibility really that's necessary to carry an epic that's this large. Um, I think his performance really kept the spectacle connected to an actual person rather than allowing the movie to become only a collection of enormous sequences. And if you've seen the movie or are going to see the movie, it is very it's very much kind of told like a like a book, but it tells you events going on in the current world versus going back in time, like reliving what Odysseus had gone through. Towards the end, it catches up, to the current time, but it's very back and forth. And there are some jaw dropping set pieces that you see, and the major sequences in this film are really the kind that remind you why people still go to theaters. And these sequences are massive, and they do a really good job without becoming empty, technically staggering, without really feeling like mere demonstrations. As I said, the scale is overwhelming, but the filmmaking remains really controlled with it. And with that comes some really elite cinematography. Like the camera work does more than make the movie look expensive. It really gave the environments weight, danger, and mythic power. And the imagery really made the journey feel enormous while still keeping Odysseus at the center of it. And so, fun fact, I don't know for those listening how much you know about like IMAX cameras or anything, but so Nolan like completely essentially designed and rebuilt some parts of the IMAX camera to kind of tailor what he wanted it to do. Um, IMAX cameras are so loud, he had to build like a muffler around it so it wasn't like distracting. And they're also super duper heavy. So he had a crew of like 6 people like wheeling it around like as he needed to in the scene. And that, it's a very, 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 very high quality camera, but it's just like the length of how far he was willing to go to deliver this end item product was fantastic. Um, the movie I thought really has a dynamite score. The music is like an essential part of the experience because it helps amplify the awe, the tension, the tragedy, and as well as the forward momentum without simply telling the audience what to feel. And the score and imagery like are built to work together. The editing was done by Jennifer Lame, who helped edit Oppenheimer as well. And I think this collaboration between Nolan and Lame is ultimately the movie's secret weapon because I think her editing really just seems to unlock something in Christopher Nolan's style that we hadn't seen pre Oppenheimer. And I think for the context of this one, like this helped give this scale rhythm and really preventing such a massive story from becoming unwieldy. And I mean, after Oppenheimer, like I think this feels like future further proof that they are one of the best director editor pairings working today. And as I said, like every department in this movie really felt connected between the performances, the score, editing, cinematography, sound, and just overall spectacle. Like they do not feel like isolated achievements. They really combine into one unified experience. And I think that total command is what really elevated this movie from impressive to profound for me. So I know that was a lot.
Oh, don't worry, I have plenty. I'm gonna also just try and keep things concise since you mention a couple things. I'm gonna mention some of the actors particularly. First, yeah, I think Matt Damon does do a great job. I mean, it's what you come to expect with people in his caliber, like Leo or him. I think like it's definitely going to be an Oscar worthy nomination going on. I think this whole movie. I said it in my review that this movie is probably going to give Sinners a run for its money, being the most nominated movie because it just has like so much stuff going on. Um, so yeah, Matt Damon was great. I think that Anne Hathaway's performance in this, although she's not in it, she's in it a decent amount, but not in it nearly as much as Matt Damon. I think that, hold on, give me a second. Let me turn up the light or something. I don't know what happened here with I have like my window open and like I was doing natural lighting and I guess it's getting a little overcast.
The sun went down.
Yeah, I was turning into Freaky Nicky, just slurking into the darkness there. Um, but yeah, so Anne Hathaway's performance, I think, is up there with what she did in Les Mis. I really enjoyed the stuff that she came up with, how much like rage and she's so unsure of what's going on with her husband, and her husband's off to war, and she's dealing with all these fuck ass suitors in her house, and it's just like, yeah, I thought like she did a really great job. Tom Holland was good as well. I think he had great chemistry with everybody he interacted with. John Leguizamo was a big shock to me. I thought he did fantastic because I really just know him from being Sid the Sloth. I know him from a couple other like comedy things, but I really enjoyed him in this film as well. My other big standout from the supporting cast is obviously Robert Pattinson. He's kind of more of the out of all the suitors, he's kind of like the the boss of the suitors, so to speak, and he's so manipulative and conniving, but also so charming as well. And his little thing he's got going on with Mia Goth as well, that was pretty funny. But yeah, him as an antagonist is not something that you see often, and I'm very much looking forward to now seeing him being the antagonist in Dune later on this year because clearly he can handle that very well. Um, the costumes look great. The I loved like in the middle part of the movie when they go to Hades, that was shot so well. Um, Shout out to Elliot Page as well. He did a great job in the small amount that he was in it. Benny Safdie as how do you say his name?
Agamemnon.
Agamemnon, aura farming, as everybody's been saying with his costume and everything. He was really good for the small amount he was in it. Um, yeah, the whole sequence with the Cyclops, the whole sequence with Cersei and while they're going through all these different quote unquote trials dealing with the gods' wraths and everything, is so different from anything I feel like I've seen in a Nolan film. It had like kind of like Nolan was tackling his own sense of horror kind of the way it was shot, which I really liked. The sound was incredible. You already mentioned the score. For me, I don't think this is Ludwig's best work. But it's certainly great and it did its job for the movie. Um I know people have been saying like, oh, just go out and watch the movie even if you can't see it in IMAX. Don't waste your time. If you can't see it in IMAX, like I don't know, you have to figure out a way to like fly to somewhere that has an IMAX screen, do what you got to do. Because I couldn't imagine watching this on just like a regular. Imagine just for the first time seeing this on your TV. Like you have
Yeah,
to
it'd be
watch it
like
in
what?
IMAX. Yeah. So the sound alone, like when we were in the IMAX theater, like when they're in like the storms on the boat or they're, the Battle of Troy, you just feel like you're there. Like it's
Mhm.
just so like you're so engrossed in it. So that was great as well. Um, like you said, it kind of has the layout of the book, The Odyssey, where it like kind of bounces back and forth between the timelines and the characters introduced. And honestly, the ending is so satisfying. It had people in our theater cheering and hooting and hollering and clapping and all that. So yeah, those are my positives in a nutshell. Definitely highly recommend it. I think that this is one of Nolan's, I mean, it's, incredible to say, but it's one of his best looking films when he's like known for being a filmmaker who has great looking films, but it's definitely up there, like, definitely up there as, like, one of his best, like, practical effects, even the CGI or whatever thing they use for the Cyclops and whatnot, like, it just all looks great. The scale of it is great. Yeah, we could go on and on, but it's yeah, an excellent film, definitely worth the watch, even though it is, as I said, a little long, but yeah, grand old time we had.
Yeah. And so for if anybody listening, watching is in Orlando as we are, so we saw it at the theater on International Drive, the Point Orlando. So for those of you who don't know, the screen in there, if you're reading a lot on the internet about, oh, like it was shot in IMAX 70 millimeter, I have to go see it in IMAX 70 millimeter. There's only a handful of those theaters. Um, the screen at the Point Orlando is actually a 70 millimeter size screen. It's just a digital, like standard IMAX projector. It used to be a 70 millimeter and then it broke, and there's only so many parts of those that they can use to fix it. But if you're worried about screen size or things like 1,000% go see it in IMAX, and the bigger the screen, the better.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I have a friend that there you mentioned we're in Orlando, in South Florida and Fort Lauderdale, they actually do have a 70 millimeter IMAX screen down there. I think it's the only one here in Florida. And my friend is literally waiting to see the movie and he couldn't get a ticket until next month. So like it's getting booked out, but I'm glad that people are taking advantage of seeing it in IMAX, seeing it in 70 millimeter. I've recommended that everybody see it in IMAX if they can, or just the biggest screen that they're able to. I know some people don't have IMAX or anything, so some people are seeing it just in, just the biggest screen they can. So, yeah, I think that we're in the consensus with basically everybody that it's an excellent film. I haven't heard one person say to me they disliked it. So,
Yeah,
that
and I
should tell you.
mean, for me, like I, I think it's this, after the dust settles and everybody's seen it. Like I think this is going to be seen as not just one of the year's best movies, but it's also going to be one of the defining theatrical experiences of the decade. Like I'm probably cheating a little bit going back this far, but like Avengers Endgame and even Infinity War like had people grappled and locked into that theatrical experience. This is up there for that.
I mean, it's a better movie than both.
Yeah, I agree with that too.
Um, I enjoyed Infinity War more, but it's a bit like it's one of those things where it's like I have movies I have enjoyed more, but it's a very like one of the most competently made movies since I don't know, like Sinners last year or Oppenheimer or like the last Nolan film. Honestly, whatever film he did before Oppenheimer. So yeah, it's well
Tenet.
done.
Tenet was what he did
Oh,
before
no, I take that
Oppenheimer.
back then. No, 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 never mind, not Tenet, no, 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 no.
Hey,
No,
Tenet,
no, no, no,
Tenet, I
no.
didn't think was that bad. I
It's
don't know
not
why it
bad,
got all
but
the hate.
it's certainly not bad, but I take
It's
that
it's
back. It's not
no
it's not up there for me.
I can agree with that. Like, so it's funny. Like, I know I mentioned this one is in my top five. So, uh, Oppenheimer, I have it one. Dark Knight, I have it two. I'm gonna jump around. Dunkirk, I have it five. Where I'm split is three and four. Uh, I gave this the same score that I gave Inception, and I'm trying to figure out which one of those is better between the two.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen, like, Dunkirk. I enjoyed this movie more than Oppenheimer, but I feel like I was lower on Oppenheimer than most others. Um
I'm honestly probably higher on it than most. Like,
I
I
mean, the movie's definitely great,
yeah.
but, it's the same thing, like, I didn't hear anybody say any bad thing about it when, like, coming out of the theater, or anybody who saw it, like, everybody kinda has good words to say. It's just, like, an enjoyment thing for me, so I enjoyed this movie much more than Oppenheimer. It's better than The Dark Knight Rises. Um, I enjoy Batman Begins more than this movie, but it's a better movie than Batman Begins. The only movies I'd say that I have ahead of it are The Dark Knight and Inception. Those are the only 2, maybe The Prestige, because I think The Prestige is just so unique, um, and I enjoy that one a lot. So, it's top 5 Nolan for me as well, but those are the only ones I'd have above it, honestly. It's crazy to think that he just, like, dropped this movie, said, "Hey, I'm gonna do the Odyssey," just did this, boom, bam, top 5,
Yeah.
bam. Gonna definitely break 1 billion. It sounds like it's making a shit ton of money already, um, which I'm happy to hear. Like, we need to have, studios back movies to be made more like this rather than fuck ass Moana live action. So, yeah.
So it's funny, like you and I kind of talked about this at the theater. So we were talking about, how this is a big deal, and then obviously, Doomsday is coming out, but also Dune is coming out. And for those who don't know, I'm a big Dune fan. And so going back to like my previous years and like rating movies and things. So Oppenheimer came out in 2023 and was my favorite movie of that year. 2024, Dune Part 2 came out. That was my favorite movie of that year. This year you've got Nolan competing with Dune, and I'm curious to see which one I'm gonna enjoy more. I wouldn't be shocked to see if I gave him the same score. We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not a huge Dune fan, so I doubt that I'm gonna think it's better than the Odyssey. I think that, I'm gonna enjoy it, definitely more than Doomsday. But we will uh we will see. Yeah, that's in December. That's months away, so we shall see. Um yeah, so let's give our ratings for the Odyssey. What did you give it?
I gave it a 9.7 out of 10.
Let me ask you, what kept it from being, have you given a movie a 10?
Yes. I have a very small list of 10 out of 10 perfect movies.
And what about this movie kept it from the point 3?
So, a lot of how I do my grading is just kind of thinking product as a whole and weighting not only enjoyment factor, but also technical, well made for its time, and uh, just high level overview of what the movie is and how I felt leaving. Um, I think the very minor things that we kind of addressed, like it's the Tom Holland had a couple knickknacks within his performance. Like if you had said mother and father, that would have created like a more immersion. Um, no disrespect to Travis Scott, but I don't know why Travis Scott played the bard. Like you could have had anybody else play the bard and not be a rapper and go sicko mode and wave the microphone stand in the air. Uh,
He's Nolan's favorite rapper.
I,
So,
I guess. Um, I think so. For context, I gave this score to my favorite movie of last year as well, Sinners. I don't know between this one and Sinners, which is better yet. I have yet to like weight everything against each other, but typically I will kind of sit down and figure out like, hey, what do I have above it and determine like how I enjoyed it more. So like, The Dark Knight, I gave a 9.8. And like part of that could be, that extra point one could be credited to just Batman. Like it could be.
yeah, I
Um
understand.
so I think I don't know what could have made it, a 10 out of 10 because I think part of it for me with like Oppenheimer was one that I gave a 10 out of 10. And I think that was because my expectations were exceeded. This one I was expecting similar results to Oppenheimer, the previous work, and it met that and then some, but not exceeded it more than as far as what Oppenheimer delivered.
Makes sense. Yeah, I gave it a 4.5 out of 5. It's a 9.5 out of 10 for me. Yeah, Invite immediately got knocked straight down the podium as soon
Yeah.
as I saw this. So unfortunate, but still in the top four.
It's all a timing thing. Like if this had come out, a month before, like the invite wouldn't have gotten a number one. But yeah, like the invite was my number one, and then a week goes by, this comes out, and boom.
Yeah. So, yeah.
It's
Anything else you wanted to touch on for the Odyssey?
it's funny you ask like about the scoring and everything. So I have, let me double check my count here. 18 movies that I would give a perfect 10 out of 10.
I mean, yeah, that's you can't just go around just throwing 10 out of 10s every day. So
No,
I'm
you
the
can't.
same way. Not everything is a 5 out of 5, unfortunately. So, um, yeah, I mean, I think that about wraps it up for this episode. Two pretty good movies that we saw recently, and then one kind of meh. So it's the Odyssey really did feel like a true summer blockbuster, bringing back that kind of feel. So, highly recommend seeing that, seeing The Invite. If you see Evil Dead, you can wait to see that on streaming, whatever. Um, but yeah, those are all my thoughts on all three of those movies. You have anything else?
No, I'm all good.
All right. Well, then that'll do it for this episode. We will see you all in the next one. Take care, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.